The night was a wound, open, bleeding, alive with the cruel laughter of men who believed the darkness could hide their sins. The sheriff's lantern swung from a rusted nail, its dim flame trembling against the wooden walls, and in that trembling light Leah Monroe stood with wrists bound and spirit untamed. Her face was bruised, her lips cracked, but her eyes, those deep, defiant eyes, still burned with the stubborn glow of someone who refused to surrender. She had spoken truth in a town that worshipped lies, and for that Sheriff Silas Blackwood had marked her as an example. "Tomorrow," he'd sneered, his voice dripping venom, "we'll shave that pretty head of yours clean. Let the whole town see what happens when a woman forgets her place." The men laughed, the air thick with whiskey and arrogance, but inside her chest Leah's heart whispered prayers not for mercy, but for strength. The sound of rain began to tap against the roof, soft at first, then harder, until the wind howled like a living thing. She lifted her chin despite the pains slicing through her ribs, and in that moment, even broken and cornered, she looked like a storm refusing to die. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the plains like a promise of reckoning. Hours dragged by, marked only by the rasp of her breath and the ache in her body. Her arms trembled, her ankles raw from the ropes, but her spirit was still whispering, "Endure." Every drop of rain that seeped through the cracks felt like the earth itself reaching out to her, a small, healing touch from something divine. The men outside drank and shouted until they fell asleep one by one, their laughter fading into the deep groan of thunder. The sheriff snored in his chair, boots still on, gun hanging loose at his belt. Leah watched him with quiet fury, memorizing every scar on his face, every twitch of his jaw. She told herself she would remember this night, not as her ruin, but as the birth of her freedom. When the clock struck midnight, she moved. Every inch of her body screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. The ropes cut her skin open as she twisted her wrists, the smell of blood sharp in the air. She pushed herself toward the rotten wall, shoulder first, again and again, until the wood began to crack. The rain outside seemed to pound harder, as if urging her on. Finally, the board gave way with a wet, splintered groan. She crawled through the jagged hole, tearing her skin on the splinters, her breath sharp, her heart pounding like the hooves of 1,000 horses. The night swallowed her whole. Cold rain lashed her face, soaking her thin dress until it clung to her trembling body. She tore a strip of canvas from a nearby pile and wrapped it around herself, shivering, her bare feet sinking into the mud. Behind her, a shout echoed. One of the guards had woken. She ran. The world became a blur of rain, mud, and desperate breath. Each step felt like a prayer, each heartbeat a rebellion. "Keep moving," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Keep moving." Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she ran until the sheriff's shack was no longer visible, until the only sounds left were the rain and her own heart. Somewhere beyond the dark, lightning flashed over the plains, revealing the endless, lonely stretch of the Wild West. The same land that had witnessed cruelty now seemed to cradle her, the tall grass swaying gently as if trying to hide her from pursuit. She collapsed near the riverbank, clutching the muddy ground, her tears mixing with the rain. For a moment she let herself cry, quietly, fiercely, without shame. Her sobs melted into the sound of the storm, and when her tears were gone, something inside her had changed. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had met something stronger. The will to live, the will to heal, the will to love again someday. She leaned her head against the wet earth, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of rain and soil. A faint light shimmered on the horizon, the first hint of dawn. The river beside her whispered softly, its current gentle and steady, a song of survival. Laya pressed her palm to the cold water and felt it wash over her wounds. It stung, but the sting felt like truth. Pain could be cleansing. Pain could be a beginning. She tore off the last of her bindings, watching them drift away with the current. The night's cruelty began to dissolve with them, piece by piece, until only the memory remained. She whispered into the morning mist, "You will not break me." The world was still dangerous, still filled with men like Silas Blackwood, but as the storm cleared and the sun began to rise, it painted the land in gold and hope. Her body was weak, but her spirit glowed with quiet defiance. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, she believed there had to be goodness left, someone who would not see her as a sinner or a victim, but as a soul worth saving. A crow called from the distance, wings slicing through the pink dawn. The wind brushed her hair like a soft hand, and she closed her eyes, feeling, for the first time in years, safe in the arms of the morning. The silence was warm, healing. Every inhale tasted of freedom. Every exhale released the ghosts of her suffering. She did not yet know that before the next sunset, fate would bring her face to face with a stranger whose kindness would change her forever. A man whose eyes carried the same quiet ache of a wounded soul. A man who had forgotten how to love until her arrival reminded him that even broken hearts can bloom again in the dust. If this story touched a spark in your heart, let it breathe. Leave a small comment, a gentle like, or subscribe to stay with Laya's journey. Because sometimes stories like hers remind us that healing begins the moment we choose to run toward the light, even when the world around us is still dark. The night may bruise the soul, but dawn, always, finds a way to heal it. The rain had softened to a hush, a steady rhythm over the plains, and Laya moved beneath it, like a shadow reborn. Her hair clung to her neck, her feet raw from stone and gravel. Yet something within her had changed. The terror of the night no longer ruled her. It followed her, yes, but like a fading echo. Every step she took whispered of defiance. The air smelled of wet sage and smoke from faraway chimneys. And somewhere behind her, thunder rolled again, as if the sky refused to forget her struggle. She followed the riverbank because it was the only thing that made sense. The current flowed forward, and so did she. The soft squelch of mud beneath her feet, the distant call of a hawk, the whispering reeds, they became her companions. There was a kind of healing in it, even through the pain. Each breath she drew filled her chest with life instead of fear, though her body trembled from exhaustion. Her palms were cut, her arms streaked with mud, but when she looked down at the river, she saw herself reflected in fragments, bruised, broken, but still alive. The sight brought a small, trembling smile to her lips. She tore another strip from the canvas sheet and wrapped it around her shoulders. The fabric was coarse, but its warmth felt like a promise. Every now and then she glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see men on horseback cresting the ridge, but the horizon remained empty, painted in grey light and mist. She whispered to the morning, "Keep me hidden." The river answered in ripples. When the first rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, they touched her skin like forgiveness. The world that had been cruel hours ago now glowed with fragile beauty. Droplets glittered on the tall grass like jewels, and a soft breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked earth. It was a new day, and she had earned it. Still, fear lingered at the edges of her thoughts. The sheriff's voice haunted her, his threats, his smirk, his promise of public humiliation. Every memory was a wound reopening. But beneath that fear, she also carried something fierce, a seed of anger, of dignity unbroken. That seed would become her armor. She walked for hours, the sun climbing higher, her body weakened by hunger and thirst. Once she knelt to drink from the river, the cold water stinging her lips but reviving her strength. She remembered her mother's voice from long ago, whispering that rivers remember the souls who survive beside them. "They'll carry your name to Kinderlands," her mother used to say. Laya hoped it was true. As noon approached, her vision blurred. The heat rose from the ground, shimmering like ghosts. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the tall grass, clutching her chest. Her heart raced, the world spinning in gold and white. The sound of hooves began to rise again in the distance. She pressed herself low, breath shallow, eyes darting toward the horizon. A dark shape moved among the light. A rider, steady, deliberate, coming closer. Her pulse roared in her ears. Panic flared in her chest like fire. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. The sound grew louder. The rhythmic thud of hooves, the jingle of a bridle, the creak of leather. She whispered to herself, trembling, "Not again. Please, not again." She stumbled backward, falling against a stone. Her body curled in on itself, and tears welled up without warning. The world narrowed to that one sound, the approach of another man who could decide her fate. In her mind, she saw the sheriff's smirk, the blade gleaming in sunlight, the crowd laughing. The humiliation burned anew, and she let out a broken sob. "Please," she whispered to no one, to the wind, to the ghosts of mercy, "don't shave it off." The horse stopped. A low breath of movement, a shift in weight, and then silence. Through the haze of fear, she saw boots step into view, worn, dust-covered, spurred, but not cruel. They didn't stomp or kick, they simply waited. A voice came, calm, steady, without mockery. She couldn't understand the words at first. She heard the tone before the meaning, the warmth of someone not here to harm. The world swayed as she blinked up at him. The sun was behind his head, framing him in gold light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in weathered leather, a scarf loose around his neck. His eyes were shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but his stance wasn't that of a hunter. He didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, he dismounted slowly, the reins loose in his fingers. She flinched as he moved closer, curling tighter against herself. The words tore from her throat before she could stop them. "No, please don't shave it off." He froze. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain dripping from the leaves. Then he did something unexpected. He crouched, setting a small metal canteen on the ground between them. "You're safe," he said quietly, his tone patient, like a man speaking to a frightened animal. He unwrapped the scarf from his neck and laid it beside the canteen. Then he backed away, raising both hands in peace. Laya stared at the water. Her throat ached, her lips dry, but she hesitated. The instinct to distrust was stronger than thirst. She watched him for a long while. He didn't move. He simply waited. The sky shifted to a soft blue as the last clouds drifted apart, and in that gentle light she saw the kindness in his stillness. Finally she reached forward, her hand trembling, and grabbed the canteen. The first sip of water burned her throat but soothed her soul. The second made her chest loosen. When she looked up again, he was still watching her, but not the way other men had. His eyes weren't hungry or cruel. They were tired, as though he too had seen enough of pain. "My name's Cole Bennett," he said softly, his voice like low thunder over the plains. "You're safe with me, miss." The name settled into her mind like something solid to hold on to. Safe. The word echoed, strange and unfamiliar, yet healing. She wanted to believe it. Her body was trembling still, but not from fear alone. There was warmth spreading in her chest, quiet and fragile. The breeze carried the scent of rain and dust between them, the earth breathing slow. The sun slipped higher, painting the world gold again. For the first time in days, she wasn't running. Cole's gaze shifted toward the horizon, and his expression hardened. "They're coming," he murmured. The sound of hooves returned, more than one horse, fast and purposeful. He turned to her, eyes sharp now. "Can you ride?" Laya blinked, still dazed, but nodded. He moved toward his horse, helping her up gently, one hand steady at her waist. The warmth of his touch startled her, not because it frightened her, but because it didn't. It felt human. It felt like light after too long in darkness. The horse shifted, snorting. Cole swung into the saddle behind her. "Hold on," he said. She obeyed, her fingers gripping the saddle as the first echo of the sheriff's men thundered closer. The horse leapt forward, tearing down the riverbank. Wind whipped through her hair, drying the last of her tears. For the first time since her escape, Laya felt something bloom inside her. Hope, small and trembling, but alive. The plains stretched before them, endless and wild, and as the sound of pursuit faded behind, the morning opened wide like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The sun warmed her face. She didn't know where they were going, only that this stranger rode not to capture her, but to save her. And somewhere deep in her heart, in the quiet spaces that had once known only pain, something began to heal. The wind brushed her cheek like a whisper. Keep riding, keep breathing, keep believing. Because sometimes freedom doesn't come in roaring triumph. It comes in the gentle steadiness of a kind hand and the warmth of another soul who chooses to stay. The road ahead would be long, but for now the rhythm of the horse and the thrum of her heart were enough. She closed her eyes, leaned into the wind, and let the dawn carry her toward whatever fate awaited beyond the next horizon. The wind sang low as the horse galloped across the open plain, its hooves striking the earth like a heartbeat. Laya pressed closer to Cole, her hands trembling as they clutched the saddle horn. The air rushed around them, wild, cold, alive, washing away the echoes of her screams, the smell of rain and fear that still clung to her. The world blurred into light and dust. Behind them, the shouts of men grew faint, swallowed by distance and wind. When Cole finally slowed the horse, the plains were quiet again, save for the breathing of two souls who had outrun death. He dismounted first, his movements calm, deliberate. Then he reached up to help her down. The moment her bare feet touched the ground, they nearly gave way. Cole caught her instinctively, his arms steady and sure, holding her just long enough for her to breathe again. The warmth of his chest, the strength of his hands, it felt like safety, something she hadn't known in so long that her body didn't quite believe it. "Easy," he murmured, voice low as a lullaby. She nodded wordlessly, still shaking, the canvas sheet clutched against her chest. The sun was rising now, spreading gold over the tall grass. Every blade shimmered with dew. It was beautiful, heartbreakingly so, like the world itself had decided to forgive her. Cole led the horse to a small hollow by the river, where the reeds grew thick and the water whispered softly. "We'll rest here," he said, though he could see the tension still wrapped tight around her. She didn't speak. Her eyes darted to every movement, every sound. The trust he'd seen flicker earlier was fragile, too fragile to touch, so he didn't force it. He simply built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke thin. He moved with the quiet grace of someone used to silence, used to carrying the weight of his own ghosts. Laya sat near the water, her arms wrapped around her knees. The light touched her hair, now tangled and damp, and turned it into threads of copper. She stared at her reflection in the river and didn't recognize the woman looking back. There were bruises on her jaw, a cut beneath her eye, but it wasn't the pain that broke her. It was how close she had come to losing herself, and yet somehow she hadn't. She was still here. Cole approached with a small piece of bread and a strip of dried meat. "Eat," he said gently, setting them beside her. She hesitated, then took a bite, her hunger overcoming the fear. Each chew hurt her throat, but it filled her with something quiet and healing. Food had never tasted so alive. "You're far from home," Cole said after a while, his voice carrying across the soft sound of water. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. It was written all over her, in the way her shoulders curled inward, in the small tremor of her hands. She lifted her gaze to him, her eyes deep and weary but steady. "There's no home left," she whispered. "Only what I escaped from." Cole nodded slowly. "Then we'll find you a new one." Something in the way he said it, calm, certain, like a man who meant what he spoke, settled inside her like warmth, spreading through cold veins. She turned back to the river, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. The breeze brushed her skin, carrying the scent of wild sage and pine. For the first time since the night of her escape, she didn't feel hunted. She felt seen. Cole leaned back against a rock, his hat pulled low, his gaze never leaving the horizon. He wasn't watching her with curiosity or pity, just quiet vigilance. The scars on his knuckles, the faint shadow beneath his eyes, the way he carried his silence like armor. It all told her that he too had known pain. Maybe that was why he didn't ask her to explain hers. The morning stretched on, the light growing soft and tender. Birds called from the distance, and the river hummed its endless song. Cole poured a bit of water from his canteen over her scraped hands. The cold made her flinch, but he steadied her wrist. "It'll keep it from festering," he murmured. His touch was gentle, and she felt something fragile unravel inside her chest. She had forgotten how it felt to be treated with care. When he was done, he tore a strip from his own sleeve and wrapped it around her palm. She looked at the bandage, then at him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. He paused, eyes lifting to hers. The sunlight caught the faint lines at the corner of his mouth, the hint of sorrow beneath them. "Because once," he said, "someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. I never forgot." She didn't reply, but her throat tightened. The wind shifted, carrying warmth through the reeds. It was strange, this feeling of being safe beside a stranger. Stranger still, that her heart began to slow for the first time in days. The fear didn't vanish, but beneath it something softer began to grow. As the day wore on, they hid among the tall grass whenever riders appeared in the distance. Each time, Cole shielded her, his body tense until the sounds faded. Leia watched him, wondering who he really was. There was strength in him, yes, but there was something deeper too. A sadness, a quiet loneliness that mirrored her own. She could feel it in the way he looked at the horizon, as if searching for something he'd lost long ago. By late afternoon, they followed the river deeper into the valley. The land stretched wide and endless, golden under the sun. Leia rode in front this time, wrapped in his old coat, her cheek pressed lightly against the leather saddle. She felt the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, the pulse of life that kept them moving forward. Cole's presence behind her was a silent promise. He said little, but each time the wind carried his scent, dust, leather, and faint pine, it grounded her. When they stopped for the night near a patch of cottonwoods, the sky was painted in streaks of pink and gold. Cole gathered firewood while Leia washed her face in the stream. The cold water stung, but when she looked up, her reflection no longer looked like a victim. She saw strength there, shaky but growing. Her heart whispered that maybe healing wasn't about forgetting the pain, but finding something gentle enough to rest beside it. The fire crackled softly. Cole handed her a cup of warm broth he'd made from dried herbs and water. "Drink," he said. She did, and the warmth spread through her chest, soothing, slow, healing. The silence between them was easy. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the kind that lets the soul breathe. When night fell, the stars came in thousands, glittering over the plains. Leia lay beneath a blanket, listening to the steady rhythm of Cole's breathing nearby. The air was cool, the grass soft beneath her palms. The stars seemed closer here, like lanterns hung by the hand of mercy itself. She whispered to the darkness, "Thank you," though she didn't know if she meant him, the sky, or God, maybe all three. Cole stirred, but didn't speak. His gaze was fixed on the stars too, his thoughts somewhere between memory and prayer. He didn't see her tears, and she didn't see the faint smile that crossed his face, a smile that hadn't found him in years. The wind carried the scent of night flowers and rain-wet soil. Leia closed her eyes, her breath slowing, her heartbeat sinking with the rhythm of the earth. For the first time, sleep found her not as an escape, but as peace. Before she drifted away, she felt a soft weight over her shoulders, Cole's coat placed carefully to keep her warm. She smiled faintly in the dark. The storm that had once defined her was now far behind, and though the road ahead was still unknown, she felt something sacred in that uncertainty. The dawn that awaited them would not just bring new danger, but the beginning of something neither of them had expected. a quiet, tender thread of trust that would weave their broken lives together, stitch by stitch, until both hearts remembered how to love again. The morning came soft and golden, like mercy pouring down from heaven. The sun broke through the mist over the valley, brushing the tall grass in shades of honey and warmth. Leia woke to the sound of birdsong and the faint crackle of fire. For a moment she forgot where she was, lost between dream and waking. Then she saw Cole by the fire, his hat low over his brow, his hands steady as he stirred the small pot of coffee. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke, and something quietly human. Peace, fragile but real. She sat up, clutching the blanket to her shoulders. Her hair fell loose, tangled from the night, glinting faintly under the sun. Cole turned when he heard her, his expression unreadable but kind. "Morning," he said softly, as if not to startle her. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. He handed her a tin cup, the coffee warm between her hands. The first sip burned her tongue, yet it soothed something deeper, the ache of being unseen, unwanted, hunted. The warmth spread through her like sunlight inside her chest. They didn't speak much as they packed the camp. Silence wasn't heavy between them. It felt like understanding. She watched the way Cole worked, efficient, practiced, gentle with his horse, and careful with the smallest details. Every motion told a story of a man who had learned to live quietly after life had broken him once. Leia recognized that kind of stillness. It was the silence of survival. They mounted and rode east along the river, the land unfolding endlessly before them. Hills rolled in slow rhythm, and the air shimmered with heat. Leia's body still ached, but she felt alive. Each breath of wind on her skin felt like a promise that she had outrun death for a reason. Cole rode just behind her, his eyes always scanning the distance. When their gazes met by accident, something flickered between them, an unspoken trust neither dared name. By midday, the wind had shifted. Cole stopped at a rise and turned in his saddle, studying the far-off line of dust that trembled on the horizon. "They're still tracking," he murmured. His jaw tightened. Leia followed his gaze, her heart tightening. She knew what that meant. Cole reached for her reins and nodded toward a narrow cut in the land ahead, where the river curved into a canyon thick with mesquite. "We'll take cover there," he said. She nodded, her fingers gripping the saddle until her knuckles whitened. The horse obeyed his command, moving swiftly through the grass and into the canyon. Inside, the world changed. The sound of wind softened, replaced by the murmur of running water and the hum of insects. The air was cooler here, shaded by tall cliffs streaked with red and gold. Leia slid from her saddle, her legs trembling, and knelt beside the stream. The water was clear as glass. She cupped it in her hands, washing away the sweat and dust from her face. The cold was sharp but healing. Cole crouched beside her, filling his canteen, his reflection rippling beside hers. She looked at him then, not just as her rescuer, but as a man. The light touched his features gently, revealing a face weathered by sun and loss. There was kindness there, hidden beneath the steel. She saw it in the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with quiet respect. And for a moment, she forgot the fear that had ruled her for so long. "Why are you running from them?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. He hesitated. Because sometimes, he said, his tone low and heavy, it's the only way to find peace. She didn't ask more. His answer carried the same ache she carried, the same truth that peace often came after everything else had been lost. She smiled faintly, a gesture small but real. He met her eyes, and something in him softened. The afternoon passed slowly. They rested beneath the cliffs, letting the horses graze and the sun drift westward. Cole tended to her wounds with rough gentleness. When he cleaned the gash on her arm, she winced, but his touch stayed steady. "You've been through hell," he murmured, tying the bandage with a strip of cloth from his shirt. She looked down at his hands, strong, calloused, trembling slightly as they brushed her skin. "So have you," she whispered, surprising them both. He looked up, caught in her gaze. For a moment, the air between them seemed to hum with something neither of them could name. It wasn't passion, not yet, but recognition, the kind that runs deeper, born of pain understood without words. When evening came, the sky burned orange and crimson. They sat by the fire, the canyon glowing like the inside of a flame. The shadows danced over their faces as the night began to settle. Laya leaned back against the rock, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "I used to think strength meant never needing anyone," she said softly. "Now I think maybe it's the courage to let someone in." Cole didn't reply right away. He stared into the fire, his jaw flexing, as if wrestling with something old and painful. "You're right," he said at last. "But letting someone in means they can leave too." Her heart ached at the loneliness in his tone. She reached for a stick, tracing shapes in the dirt, a river, a horse, a circle. "Then maybe the point isn't to hold on forever," she said. "Maybe it's to meet the right person in the storm." He glanced at her, and for the first time he smiled. It wasn't wide or easy, but it was real. "You talk like someone who's lived a dozen lives." She laughed softly, a sound so light it startled her. "It feels like I have." The sound faded into the stillness, and they sat in the quiet rhythm of crackling fire and distant river. Above them the stars returned, countless and bright. Cole pulled his coat around her shoulders again, and this time she didn't resist. The gesture felt natural, an unspoken language between two weary souls. As the night deepened, the canyon filled with a soft silver light. Laya felt her eyes drift closed, her head tilting toward him. Cole looked down at her, the firelight painting her skin in gold and rose. Her face was peaceful now, her breathing slow. He had seen women broken by cruelty before, but never one who carried her pain with such quiet grace. Something inside him, long dormant, stirred awake. It wasn't desire, it was something purer, something healing. He turned back to the fire, but his mind wouldn't rest. He thought of the sheriff, of the men who had hunted her, of how easily the world crushed the kind-hearted and praised the wicked. He had seen it too many times, yet sitting here beside her, he felt something shift, like a door opening in the dark. Maybe saving her wasn't just about her survival. Maybe it was about his own redemption, too. The night whispered gently around them, the wind threading through the reeds like a lullaby. He lay down a short distance away, his hand resting near his revolver, his eyes on the stars. Before sleep claimed him, he heard her murmur his name in her dreams, soft as breath. Cole. The sound broke something open in him, a wall he hadn't realized he'd built. Morning would come soon, bringing dust and danger and the men who would not stop hunting. But for now, under the healing hush of the canyon, two broken souls found the stillness between storms, the place where tenderness begins. And when dawn rose again, spilling light across the river and her sleeping face, Cole understood what the world had been trying to tell him. Some people aren't meant to be saved and left behind. Some are meant to be walked beside, all the way to the end. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but as he watched her stir awake beneath the first light, he knew he would not let her face it alone. The next horizon awaited, and somewhere beyond it, both pain and love would find their reckoning. The wind carried a strange stillness that morning, the kind that comes before storms of fate. The plains stretched endless, sun-soaked and quiet, yet Cole felt the weight of pursuit heavy in his bones. He had lived his life by instinct, watching weather, following tracks, sensing danger before it appeared. And now every sound in the distance told him they were running out of time. The sheriff would not rest until Leah Monroe was dragged back in chains. They rode for hours through the valley, the air thick with heat and dust. Leah's hands clutched the reins tightly, her gaze fixed ahead. The exhaustion in her body was deep, but her spirit glowed with a kind of fragile defiance. Each step the horse took away from Dust Ferry felt like a breath of freedom, yet she knew it couldn't last forever. The law of men like Silas Blackwood had long arms and cruel memories. By midday they reached a ridge overlooking a cluster of buildings half buried in dust. Fort Allen, an old frontier post turned courthouse and trading hub. Its faded flag fluttered weakly in the sun, and the sound of hammering echoed from somewhere beyond the stables. Cole slowed the horse, studying the place with wary eyes. "We'll rest here," he said, though his tone carried a shadow of doubt. Leah followed his gaze. The fort didn't look like safety. The paint peeled from its walls, and the faces that moved between the doorways were hard, weary, suspicious. Still, it was the only place where law could meet law. A chance, however thin, to face Blackwood not as fugitives, but as witnesses. She nodded faintly. "If justice still breathes anywhere," she whispered, "let it breathe here." Cole dismounted first and offered his hand. She took it. His fingers were rough but steady, grounding her as her boots touched the ground. Together they walked toward the courthouse, the air dry and shimmering. The old building loomed ahead, its sign creaking in the wind. District Hall of Allen County. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and old paper. A man sat slouched behind the desk, his waistcoat stretched tight, his eyes small and sharp. Cole removed his hat. "We need to see the judge," he said. The clerk eyed Leah with a sneer, then spat into a cup. "Name?" Cole's jaw tensed. "Cole Bennett. She's Leah Monroe. We've come with proof of Sheriff Blackwood's crimes." That got the man's attention. He straightened, frowning. "Proof?" Cole pulled a small black ledger from his saddlebag and set it on the counter. The clerk opened it, scanning the lines. Bribes, false arrests, signatures of men long gone silent. His face paled slightly. "Wait here," he muttered, disappearing into the back room. Minutes later, the door creaked open again, and the judge appeared, a thick, balding man whose smile was too practiced to be honest. He looked them over with the ease of someone who already believed he held all the power. "Mr. Bennett, Miss Monroe," he said in that oily drawl, I hear you have accusations against Sheriff Blackwood. Dangerous claims in a peaceful town. Cole kept his gaze steady. Dangerous only if ignored. He placed the ledger on the judge's desk. That book contains enough to hang him twice over. Embezzlement, torture, unlawful punishment of citizens, especially women. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes skimming the words but not truly seeing them. He tapped the desk with 2 fingers, his smile never fading. And you bring this to me why? Hoping for mercy. Or perhaps a reward? Laya's heart sank. She had seen that look before, the indifference of men who measured justice by coin, not conscience. She stepped forward, voice trembling but strong. "We came for truth," she said. "We came because a man like him doesn't deserve to wear a badge." For a moment, silence filled the room. The judge's smile thinned. "Truth," he repeated, as though tasting the word. "Truth is an expensive thing, Miss Munro, and I'm afraid you don't have the currency for it." Cole's hand brushed his revolver. "Then maybe the ledger will speak louder than money." Before the judge could reply, the door behind them burst open. A dozen men poured in, deputies, all bearing the silver star of Blackwood's command. At their front was Evan Pike, his head still bandaged from their last encounter. He grinned when he saw them. "Thought you could run, huh?" Laya's stomach turned to stone. Cole moved without thinking, stepping in front of her, gun drawn. The room erupted in chaos. The first shot shattered a window, sending sunlight and glass spraying into the room. Laya ducked, heart pounding, as Cole fired once, clean, precise, knocking a weapon from a deputy's hand. The judge shouted for order, his voice drowned beneath the sound of boots and shouting. Laya grabbed the nearest object, a bottle of ink, and hurled it at the man lunging toward her. It burst across his face, black streaks splattering his eyes. He stumbled back with a howl. Cole turned, firing again to keep them back. "We need to move," he barked. Laya's breath came in ragged gasps. The fire of fear burned through her, but underneath it was something else, something fierce. The same will that had made her break through prison walls now rose again. She grabbed the judge's wooden gavel from the desk and slammed it into the nearest window. The glass shattered, and daylight poured through like freedom reborn. "Go!" Cole shouted. She climbed onto the sill, shards cutting her palms, but she didn't stop. He followed, the ledger clutched tight in his hand. They landed in the dirt outside, dust swirling around them. Behind them, the deputies shouted. Cole pulled Laya toward the horses. The square of Fort Allen was alive with noise now, people spilling into the streets, drawn by the gunfire. Cole swung into the saddle and helped her up behind him. "Hold tight," he said, and she did, her arms locking around him as the horse bolted forward. They rode hard through the streets, past merchants and soldiers who shouted and dove out of the way. Bullets kicked up dust near their feet. The courthouse bell rang, loud and frantic, echoing across the town. Cole turned the horse toward the old bridge leading out of the fort. Behind them, Evan Pike's voice roared, "Don't let them out! Sheriff wants them alive!" The chase was relentless. The horses' hooves thundered over the planks, the river flashing beneath them. One bullet grazed Cole's shoulder, tearing the fabric. He grunted, tightening his hold on the reins. "You all right?" he shouted over the wind. Laya pressed closer, her voice steady despite the fear. "I am, if you are." He smiled faintly through the pain. "Then we're fine." They reached the far side of the river and plunged into the wild scrub beyond. The shouts behind them faded until only the rush of water remained. When Cole finally stopped, his chest was heaving, sweat mixing with blood. Laya slid down first, reaching for him. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing," he said, but his voice wavered. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound. He hissed, then caught her wrist. Their eyes met, hers full of worry, his full of quiet gratitude. "You shouldn't waste kindness on a man like me," he murmured. "I'm not wasting it," she whispered back. "I'm giving it." Something in those words melted the hardness in him. He let out a breath that trembled like the first sigh of a man learning how to trust again. Around them the world grew still, bathed in the soft gold of late afternoon. The river sparkled, and a single hawk circled overhead. They rested there as the sun dipped lower, the light turning honey and rose. Laya leaned against a rock, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the ledger. "If that book truly holds what you say," she said quietly, "then maybe justice isn't gone yet." Cole looked toward the horizon, where the distant spires of Dust Ferry shimmered faintly in the heat. "Justice," he said, "isn't a thing that survives on its own. People have to fight for it." Her gaze softened. "And you still believe it's worth fighting for?" He met her eyes, the last light of day reflected in his. "I do now." The evening wind carried their words away, leaving only silence and the heartbeat of the earth beneath them. For a long while, neither moved. The pain, the blood, the dust, all of it felt distant. What remained was the quiet truth that healing often comes not from safety, but from standing together when everything else falls apart. As the first stars appeared above, Laya whispered, "Then we go back, don't we?" Cole nodded slowly. "We go back, and this time we end it." The night fell gentle around them, not as a threat, but as a veil of peace before the storm. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Sheriff Blackwood prepared his spectacle of cruelty. But what awaited him would not be submission. It would be reckoning. Laya rested her head against Cole's shoulder, her voice barely a breath. "Whatever happens, I'm not afraid anymore." He turned his head, his words quiet as prayer. "You never needed to be. You were stronger than any of them from the start." The stars flickered brighter, scattered like hope over the dark. And as the horse stood still beside the whispering river, two weary souls found their courage in each other's heartbeat, ready to ride back into the fire, not as fugitives, but as the living proof that no cruelty can kill the spirit that refuses to kneel. The wind moved through the reeds like a sigh, carrying with it the promise of morning and the healing that always follows after the storm. The sky over Dust Ferry bled crimson as the sun sank behind the hills, and the town prepared for another night of fear. Rumors ran through the streets like wildfire. Laya Monroe had returned. Some said she came back to beg mercy, others that she had brought the ghost of vengeance with her. No one knew which story to believe, but every window shuttered early and every door locked. The people had lived too long under Sheriff Silas Blackwood's rule to mistake calm for safety. Cole and Laya rode in from the east, the horses' hooves muffled on the dusty road. The air tasted of smoke and silence, the kind that comes before justice is born. Cole's wound had nearly closed, though pain still flared with each movement. He hid it well, His focus was the courthouse ahead, the place where truth had once been buried alive under corruption and fear. Leia's hand rested lightly against his arm, steadying herself more for his sake than her own. The closer they came, the more her heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from resolve. They dismounted near the old water trough, tying the reins to a post. The street was nearly empty, save for a few faces peeking from the shadows, people who once turned away when injustice came knocking. Now their eyes followed her with a strange mixture of awe and shame. Cole looked around, scanning rooftops, alleys, the corners where rifles could wait, his every sense sharpened. Inside the courthouse, the sound of boots and voices echoed, a crowd gathering, restless. Blackwood had called for a public correction, his last attempt to display his power. But the town had changed since the stormy night Leia fled. The whispers had grown louder, the silence heavier. When they stepped through the door, the murmur spread like a wave. Every face turned. The sheriff stood at the center, his black coat pressed, his hat low. He looked older now, the arrogance carved deeper into his face. His hand rested on his pistol, as though the metal itself gave him authority. "Well," he drawled, his voice cutting through the air, "look who crawled back from the grave." Leia walked forward, the hem of her canvas dress brushing the dusty floor. Her hair, tangled but free, shimmered under the dim light. There was no shame left in her posture, only quiet fire. "I didn't crawl," she said, her voice steady, soft enough to make the silence lean closer. "I walked." The room rippled with whispers. Blackwood's smirk faltered for a moment, then returned sharper. "You've got courage, girl, I'll give you that. But courage don't mean innocence. This town saw you defy the law, and the law remembers." Cole stepped up beside her, setting the black ledger on the judge's desk with a heavy thud. "Then let the law remember this," he said. "Every bribe you took, every woman you humiliated, every man you silenced, it's all in there." The judge, nervous, sweating, shifted in his seat. "Sheriff, if these records are true—" "True?" Blackwood barked, rounding on him. "You think I'd let a couple of fugitives tell you what's true?" He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms. "These two would have you believe I'm the villain, that your sheriff's the devil himself. But I've kept this town safe while the rest of the frontier burned. You think the government cares if you live or die? I'm the law here." His words thundered across the room, but this time they didn't settle. The crowd shifted uneasily. The old power of his voice had begun to crack. People remembered too much now. The missing men, the beatings, the tears. They remembered the girl's screams in the square, the blade glinting in the sun. Leia stepped closer to him, her bare feet silent on the wood. Her eyes locked on his, and in that gaze was everything he had tried to break. Pride, pain, forgiveness, and the strength to defy him again. "You call yourself the law," she said, "but a man who kills dignity is no law. You were afraid of what you couldn't control. That's why you punished me, not because I was wrong, but because I wouldn't bow." The words struck like lightning. The silence that followed felt holy. For the first time, the townsfolk didn't look at her with pity. They looked at her with recognition. They saw themselves reflected in her defiance. Blackwood's hand went to his pistol. Cole saw it before anyone else. He moved fast, stepping between them, his voice cutting through the air. "Don't!" The sound was calm, final, like a door closing. Blackwood sneered. "You think you can stop this? You think anyone here has the spine to stand against me?" He turned to the people. "You all owe me your lives. You forget who built this place?" From the back, a voice answered, rough but steady. "You built it on fear." Another followed. "And on lies." The murmur grew, spreading through the room like a rising tide. Men who once averted their eyes now stepped forward. Women who had been silent now lifted their chins. The air thickened with something stronger than anger. It was awakening. Leia reached into her tangled hair, pulled free a small shard of glass she had carried since the day she escaped. She held it up, the light catching on its edge. Then, slowly, she took a single lock of her own hair and cut it. The strands fluttered to the floor. "My honor doesn't live in my hair," she said, voice trembling but unbreakable. "It lives in my soul, and you can't shave that away." The crowd stirred. Something broke open. Even the deputies who had once stood firm now looked uncertain, their loyalty trembling under the weight of truth. Cole's gaze stayed fixed on Blackwood. "It's over," he said. But the sheriff's pride was an old beast, and it wouldn't die quietly. He drew his pistol, hand shaking with rage. The movement was quick, but Cole was quicker. The shot rang out, splitting the air. Blackwood's gun flew from his grasp, clattering across the floor. The echo hung for a heartbeat, then the door burst open. Men in clean blue coats entered, their badges gleaming under the lantern light. U.S. Marshals. The judge nearly collapsed in relief. The lead marshal, tall and stern, held up the telegram Cole had forced him to send days before. "Sheriff Silas Blackwood," he announced, voice cutting through the room, "you are under arrest for corruption, assault, and abuse of authority." Blackwood stared, disbelief twisting his face into something hollow. "You can't." The marshals didn't wait for permission. Iron cuffs snapped around his wrists. The crowd erupted, not in cheers at first, but in silence, a deep, trembling silence that felt like the first breath after drowning. Then came the noise, applause, cries of relief, tears. The spell of fear was broken. Leia swayed slightly, the world tilting around her. Cole caught her before she fell, his arm wrapping around her waist. She leaned into him, not from weakness, but from release. The weight she had carried for so long lifted like fog burned off by the morning sun. Around them, the people of Dust Ferry were reborn, their voices rising together for the first time, not in anger, but in unity. Cole looked down at her, a soft smile breaking through the weariness on his face. "It's done," he whispered. She nodded, tears glimmering in her lashes. "No," she murmured, voice barely a breath. "It's beginning." Outside, the light had changed. The sun broke through the clouds, pouring gold over the square. The same place that had once been her prison now shimmered with life. Children peeked from behind their mothers, old men tipped their hats, and even the wind seemed to hum in quiet celebration. Cole and Leia walked out into that light together. The crowd parted around them, faces filled with gratitude and wonder. As they passed, people reached out, not to restrain her, but to touch her hand, her shoulder, as if she carried hope itself. She looked up at the sky, eyes closing as sunlight kissed her face. The warmth seeped deep into every wound and every memory, softening what once was sharp. Healing didn't come in a rush. It came like this, slow, patient, inevitable. Cole's hand brushed hers. It was a simple touch, but it carried the weight of everything they'd endured. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Their silence said it all, that love sometimes begins in the ashes of fear, that tenderness grows strongest where cruelty once reigned. The bells of the courthouse began to ring, not for punishment, but for freedom. The sound echoed through the streets, over the rooftops, across the plains. It was the sound of a town remembering its soul. Lia turned to Cole, her eyes glistening. "We did it," she whispered. He smiled, his voice low and certain. "You did." She shook her head, stepping closer until their foreheads nearly touched. "No, we both did. And maybe now the world will start to heal." The wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of sage and smoke, and the light caught in the curve of her smile. Around them, Dust Ferry bloomed with a peace it had never known. And as they stood there, hand in hand, beneath the wide, forgiving sky, it felt like the earth itself exhaled, a long, gentle breath of healing after years of silence. Beyond the town's edge, the river waited, endless and calm. Tomorrow they would leave this place behind. But tonight they stood in the square, hearts open to the fading sun, knowing that sometimes love is not born from perfection, but from survival, from two souls who refuse to let the world take the light from them. And with that light still burning, they would ride toward a new dawn, carrying the soft, quiet power of the healed and the unbroken. The days that followed the fall of Sheriff Blackwood were gentle in a way Lia had almost forgotten existed. The air smelled different now, cleaner, softer, touched with the sweetness of rain that had not yet come. The people of Dust Ferry walked lighter through their days, their shoulders unburdened from years of fear. The square, once a place of punishment, had become a place of rebuilding. New voices filled it, children laughing, hammers striking, merchants calling out prices without the sheriff's tax pressed upon their throats. Life had begun to breathe again. Lia often walked by the river at sunrise, where the golden mist hung low over the water. She would kneel on the bank, feeling the cool ripples against her fingers, and think about the woman she had been before all of this, the one who thought she had to hide her fire to survive. That woman was gone. What remained was someone new, softer in spirit, but stronger in soul. The scars on her arms were fading, but she no longer wished them gone. They reminded her of what she had endured, of what it meant to live and still find beauty in the ache. Cole watched her from a distance those mornings, leaning against the wooden post near the horses. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt the quiet she seemed to find there. He simply stayed close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. His presence was its own kind of healing, steady and unspoken. In the early light, the lines on his face seemed gentler, the weight he carried lighter. There were moments when their eyes would meet across the riverbank, and though no words passed between them, something deeper did, something made of shared silence and understanding. When she returned to the heart of town, people greeted her with smiles that were no longer tinged with guilt. The women she had once seen turn away now brought her baskets of bread, fabric, small tokens of thanks. One child pressed a single white flower into her hand and whispered, "Mama says you made the bad man go away." Lia knelt, brushing a hand over the girl's cheek. "No," she said softly, We all did. But when she walked away, her throat tightened. Hope, it seemed, was a fragile miracle, and yet it bloomed everywhere now. Cole spent his days helping rebuild the bridge that crossed the river, the same place where he had first found her, half dead and terrified. Each beam he lifted felt like a redemption of his own. He had been a man of the road too long, a wanderer trying to outpace his own regrets. But when he worked with the townsmen, he felt something anchor inside him again, a quiet belonging he hadn't felt in years. He could see it in the way the townsfolk now looked at him, no longer as an outsider, but as the man who had stood against the sheriff when no one else dared. In the evenings, Leia would bring him supper wrapped in cloth, simple meals, often half-burned because she was still learning to cook without fear of failure. He would smile every time, teasing her gently, and she would roll her eyes, but blush nonetheless. There was warmth in their exchanges that went beyond words. It wasn't the burning kind of love born of sudden passion. It was the slow, healing kind, growing quiet roots beneath shared moments and glances that lingered a heartbeat too long. One night, after the bridge was nearly finished, they sat side by side on its half-built span, the river whispering beneath them. The sky above was a vast, dark canvas brushed with silver stars. Cole held a small lantern between them, its glow casting a halo of gold across her face. "You've changed this place," he said after a while. "You've changed me." Leia smiled faintly. "Maybe the place was ready to change. Maybe you were too." He turned toward her, eyes soft. "You still don't see it, do you? You didn't just survive, Leia. You made them remember what courage looks like." She looked down at the water, her reflection trembling in its surface. "I only did what I had to do." He reached out, brushing his fingers against her wrist. "And that's exactly what makes it brave." The touch was light, careful, but it sent a quiet warmth through her. For a moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. The night hummed softly, filled with crickets and the far-off call of an owl. She turned her hand over, letting his fingers rest against her pulse. Neither spoke. The silence was full, alive, almost sacred. When she finally met his gaze again, there was something unspoken between them, a tenderness so deep it didn't need to be declared. She saw it in the way he looked at her, not as someone fragile to be pitied, but as someone whole. She smiled, a small, tired, radiant smile that seemed to hold both their stories within it. The days passed like that, slow, golden, unhurried. Life returned to Dust Ferry. The fields beyond the town bloomed again, and laughter found its way back to the porches. But even as peace grew, the ghosts of the past lingered like faint echoes. Some nights, Leia would wake from dreams filled with thunder and the sound of blades scraping through hair. She would sit upright, her breath quick, her skin cold. And every time, Cole was there. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't ask. He'd just take her hand and let her lean against him until her heartbeat found its rhythm again. In those quiet hours, healing wasn't a word. It was a heartbeat shared in the dark. One afternoon, the townsfolk gathered by the new schoolhouse Leia had opened by the river. It was small, with pale wood walls and a porch lined with flowers. Children filled the air with their voices, shouting, laughing, running barefoot through the grass. Cole stood at the fence, watching her teach. Her voice carried lightly over the field, warm and sure, telling stories of bravery, of kindness, of truth that outlasted cruelty. He realized then that this was her true calling, not vengeance, not survival, but creation. She was building something lasting, something beautiful from the ashes. Later that evening, when the last child had gone home, Laia sat on the porch steps, her skirts spread out like soft petals around her. Cole approached quietly, the scent of pine and river air following him. He placed a small box beside her. "Found this at the general store," he said. "Thought it might suit you?" She opened it and gasped softly. Inside lay a ribbon, deep red, the same shade as the scarf he'd offered her when they first met. She touched it gently, the fabric soft under her fingers. "You remembered," she whispered. He smiled, the corners of his eyes creasing. "Hard thing to forget. You looked like fire that day, wild and scared and stronger than you knew." Her throat tightened. She looked up at him, her eyes glimmering in the fading light. "I didn't think anyone would ever see me like that." "I did," he said simply. "Still do." The sun dipped low, painting the river in shades of rose and amber. She lifted the ribbon, tying it loosely in her hair, and laughed softly. "Then maybe it's time I start seeing her too." He chuckled, a warm, low sound that seemed to melt into the evening air. "You already are." They sat there long after the sun had gone, listening to the river whisper and the wind hum through the grass. No words were needed. The silence was kind. The pain that had once haunted every breath was now just a memory, softened by love and light. As the first stars appeared, Cole reached out and took her hand again. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked quietly. She thought for a long time before answering. "Sometimes, but maybe healing isn't about running anymore. Maybe it's about staying somewhere long enough to plant something that lasts." He nodded. "Then I'll stay too." She turned her head, meeting his eyes. "You already have." The night wrapped around them gently, warm and still. Fireflies drifted over the river, their glow like tiny blessings. Cole leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. The moment was tender, unhurried, a promise written not in words but in touch. When she smiled, he felt it down to his bones. It was the kind of smile that made the world make sense again, the kind that healed more than wounds. It healed years. He drew a quiet breath, knowing without saying that this was what redemption looked like. Two souls who had walked through fire, finding rest in each other's light. And as the wind carried the scent of river water and wildflowers, the world around them faded into a peace so deep it felt eternal. Tomorrow would bring new days, new challenges, but for now there was only this: the warmth of the night, the rhythm of their hearts, and the quiet truth that love, when it comes gently, is the most healing thing of all. Far beyond the river, thunder rolled softly, distant and harmless now, like the echo of a storm that no longer had power to harm them. Laia leaned her head against Cole's shoulder, her breath steady, her soul quiet. The night sighed, and time seemed to hold its breath, honoring the peace they had earned, not stolen, not begged for, but built together from pain, hope, and the unshakable grace of love that endures. The seasons turned like pages in a worn prayer book, soft and slow, each one carrying a new shade of light. Dust Ferry no longer whispered of cruelty. The town breathed now, its wounds mending in rhythm with the river's eternal song. Grass grew tall where gallows once stood, and the square that had seen so much fear was now filled with laughter and the fragrance of bread baked fresh each morning. The echoes of pain had not vanished. They had simply become part of the land's heartbeat, softened by forgiveness and time. Lyra Monroe stood by the window of the small house she shared with Cole, sunlight pooling on the wooden floor. She wore white that morning, a simple dress of cotton that caught the wind like a living thing. Her hair, once tangled by escape and storm, now brushed against her back in calm waves. The red ribbon he had given her glowed like a small flame near her heart. Outside, she could hear the faint laughter of children on the riverbank, the hammering of new beams for homes, the quiet murmur of life that had learned to be gentle again. Cole's voice came from behind her, warm and low. "The bridge is finished." She turned. He stood in the doorway, sunlight cutting across his broad shoulders, his shirt still dusted from the work site. His face had softened in the months since the trial, lines of grief slowly replaced by the quiet steadiness of peace. The man who once hid behind silence now smiled easily, like a man who had finally come home. She crossed the room and met him halfway. Their hands found each other's naturally, as though the space between them had always been waiting for that moment. "You built more than a bridge," she said. "You built a way for all of us to cross into something new." Cole smiled, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "Maybe, but I think you were the one who showed them where the river ended." They walked together toward the porch. The house stood near the bend of the river where he had first found her, broken, trembling, fighting to live. Now the same place hummed with life. Wildflowers swayed in the breeze, and the river's reflection shimmered gold in the late afternoon light. A small schoolhouse stood nearby, painted white, where Lyra spent her mornings teaching the children of the valley. The sound of their laughter carried on the wind like a song of renewal. As they sat on the porch steps, Cole poured them both coffee, the aroma filling the space between them. Lyra's eyes followed a hawk gliding over the trees, its wings steady against the breeze. "Do you ever think about the ones who didn't make it?" she asked quietly. "Every day," Cole replied. "But I think they'd be glad we're still here, that we learned how to live in peace." She nodded, her gaze distant but calm. "It took me a long time to believe that living could be an act of defiance." He chuckled softly. "You've made it an art." Lyra smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. The warmth of his body, the scent of dust and pine, the steady beat of his heart. It was all so simple, yet it was everything she had ever prayed for without knowing the words. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of gratitude, of shared memory, of a love that needed no grand declaration to be known. Evenings in Dust Ferry had a healing rhythm of their own. The townsfolk gathered near the square, telling stories, singing songs under the soft amber glow of lanterns. The river reflected the sky's colors, pink fading into violet, violet deepening into blue. Lyra often read aloud from old books, her voice lilting like a lullaby through the crowd. Cole would sit nearby, his hat tilted low, listening with that quiet smile that always reached his eyes. There were moments when he caught himself thinking how strange it was that peace could be louder than war, how the sound of laughter could erase years of gunfire in the heart. One evening, when the stars spilled thick across the horizon, a light rain began to fall. It was soft, playful, cleansing. People lifted their faces to the sky and didn't run for cover. Lia stood barefoot in the square, her dress clinging to her legs, and spun once under the drizzle. Cole watched her, the corners of his lips curving as the rain traced lines down her cheeks. When she stopped, her gaze found his. "You used to say rain means trouble," she teased. He shook his head. "Not anymore. Sometimes rain means the earth remembers how to heal." She walked to him through the mist, her hands cool from the rain. He reached up and brushed a drop from her jaw, his fingers lingering. The world around them blurred into the soft hum of water and laughter. And there, in that simple moment beneath the forgiving sky, they kissed, not as people desperate to escape the past, but as souls who had learned to live within its lessons. It was a kiss made of warmth and healing, a promise not of forever, but of now, of peace earned honestly and shared tenderly. When they pulled apart, she laughed, a bright, free sound that felt like dawn breaking. "Do you realize," she whispered, "that everything began because you stopped your horse that morning?" Cole's eyes softened. "And because you said, 'Please, don't shave it off.'" They both laughed then, the kind of laughter that cleanses the soul. And when silence returned, it was the gentle kind that needed no filling. Weeks turned to months, and the rhythm of their days found its grace. The bridge became a symbol for travelers passing through. A story whispered from campfire to campfire about the sheriff who fell and the woman who rose. Sometimes strangers stopped by to rest at the riverbank, asking if the tale was true. Lia would only smile, handing them bread or coffee, and say, "Sometimes the truth is more beautiful than the story." Cole would glance at her, knowing she was right. The truth was never about victory or vengeance. It was about healing, about the quiet transformation that happens when love takes root in broken soil and refuses to wither. On the first anniversary of Blackwood's downfall, the town gathered by the river to celebrate. Lanterns hung from the bridge like floating stars, and music filled the air. Children danced, elders sang old songs, and for the first time in memory, Dust Ferry felt whole. Cole stood with his arm around Lia, watching the reflections ripple over the water. "You think peace lasts?" he asked. She tilted her head toward him, eyes shimmering. "Peace isn't something that lasts. It's something we keep choosing. Every morning, every word, every kindness." He kissed her temple. "Then I'll keep choosing." The night deepened, and fireflies drifted over the fields like glowing prayers. Lia's voice rose in a final story for the children gathered near the bridge, a tale about a girl who ran from darkness and found light waiting at the edge of the river. Her words floated through the crowd, soft and steady, wrapping around hearts like a lullaby. And when she finished, even the night itself seemed to pause to listen to the stillness she left behind. Later, when the lanterns had burned low and the last song faded, Lia and Cole walked back to their home beneath the whispering trees. The air was cool, the moon bright above the valley. She looked up at the stars and smiled. "Do you ever think the sky watches us?" Cole glanced upward. "If it does, it's smiling tonight." She took his hand, their fingers interlocking easily, naturally. The world around them was quiet except for the soft rustle of wind in the tall grass. Every step felt lighter, as if the earth itself wanted to carry them forward. When they reached the porch, Leia paused to look back at the river. The moonlight lay across its surface like a ribbon of silver, endless and calm. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not only for the man beside her, but for every scar, every storm, every breath that had led her here. Pain had been her teacher, love had been her healing. Cole opened the door, and warm light spilled out across the porch. He turned to her and said softly, "Come inside. The night's turning cold." She smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "The cold doesn't scare me anymore." Inside, the fire crackled, and their shadows moved together on the wall, two stories woven into one. Outside, the river kept flowing, carrying with it the echoes of all that had been lost and all that had been found. Because some stories don't end where the words stop. They live on in the quiet spaces, in the hearts they touch, in the warmth they leave behind. If this story brought even a flicker of light into your soul, if it reminded you that healing can grow where pain once lived, leave a like to let it breathe in the world. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe if you wish to walk with more stories that whisper of love, redemption, and the gentle miracle of starting again. Every voice, every heart that joins this journey keeps the fire alive, and sometimes that little spark of connection is how we all remember we are never truly alone.